Rosalind Merrick kept her father's photographic gallery open on the main street with a foreclosure notice already tacked to her own front door, and the respectable side of the little town had decided she had brought it on herself, when the truth was that she was only keeping the one honest thing her father had left her. She did not know yet that before the redemption day ran out and the bank took the corner she loved, a near-silent man who framed her portraits and had scarcely said 100 words to her would put his own name beside hers against the whole town and change the shape of her life. It had begun the way the hard turns of a life so often do, with a thing she did not choose. Her father, Ambrose Merrick, had built the gallery board by board and learned the wet plate trade back east, and had raised Rosalind in the smell of collodion and silver, teaching her to coat a plate and read the light and hold a sitter still, until she could make a truer likeness than any traveling man who passed through. Then a winter lung fever took him in 3 short weeks, and Rosalind stood in the cold gallery among his cameras as though the world had simply stopped. And because she could work the plates as well as any photographer in the territory, she went on keeping the gallery open, the one trade her hands knew, in a town that had lately found it had no place for her. And the respectable side of the town, the side with the painted storefronts and the new church and the banker's wife at the head of it, looked at a young unmarried woman keeping a shop alone, developing her plates behind a curtained door at all hours, and decided well before her morning was decently done exactly what that made her. The word went round the way such words always do, low and certain and impossible to answer, and it had help, because a man Rosalind had once known had seen to it that the word had teeth. Here is the thing the town had not troubled to learn. Rosalind was 26, raised at her father's elbow by a man who had no sons, and taught her everything he knew because the work wanted doing, and she had never had the least gift for being ornamental. She kept one thing of his above all the costly cameras and lenses, a small, worn, ruby glass safe-light lantern, the deep red lamp he had developed his plates by for 30 years, the one steady glow that had shown him the image swimming up out of the silver in the dark. She lit it every night in the little dark room behind the curtain, and the warm red throw of it across the trays and the wet glass, the small flame that had watched 1,000 faces rise up out of nothing under his hands, was the one thing in that whole cold, lonely year that still felt like Ambrose and like home. And none of it would matter, because the calendar and the bank meant to finish what the gossip had started. Years back, to buy the good cameras and the corner lot both, her father had signed a promissory note against the property and had very nearly paid it down. But the note had a redemption clause and a calling date, the kind of fine print no one troubles about until someone wants to, and the banker had called it in full the season Ambrose died, knowing a grieving daughter could not raise the sum, meaning to foreclose and take the corner for the fine new brick bank he had long wanted to build there. The redemption day was set, the money was far past what the gallery could bring, and Rosalind knew the one honest thing she had kept alive with her own 2 hands could be taken by the plain reading of a paper. I have been keeping this hearth a long while now, telling the slow stories, the ones where nobody is rescued by luck, but only by the stubborn daily choosing to do the next right thing with whatever hard season you have been handed. And if that is the kind of story that keeps you good company of an evening, then pull your chair up close and stay with me, because Rosalind is about to learn the thing this whole channel keeps circling back to, that the people a town is quickest to whisper about are so often the very ones with the least to be ashamed of, and that it sometimes takes one silent, unlikely soul to see a person plain when the whole town has made up its mind not to. The banker was a heavy, careful man named Horace Danforth, who wore a good black coat and a sorrowful expression, and did not come to Rosalind with threats, but with regret. He came into the gallery himself, hat in hand, and told her in his slow, reasonable voice that it grieved him, that Ambrose had been a fine man, But business was business, and the note stood called, and when the redemption day passed, the lot would come to the bank, and perhaps it was for the best, a corner being no fit place for a lone young woman to keep late hours. He let that last part sit gently in the air the way such men do, and put his hat on, and wished her good day. And Rosalind stood among her father's cameras with the cold going all the way through her, because she had nowhere to go and no way on earth to raise the money. The teeth in the town's talk had a name, and the name was Julian Prescott. 2 years back, before her father took sick, Julian had come through as a traveling drummer, had courted Rosalind honestly enough for one summer and spoken of marriage, then moved on down the line without a word. But he had come back that spring, married now to a respectable woman with money, and finding Rosalind alone and shamed and easy to step on, he had smoothed his own history by letting it be understood, in the regretful way of a man protecting a lady's honor, that he had broken it off for good cause, that she had not been all a decent woman should be, that he had seen things. It was a lie built to cost him nothing, and her everything, and it spread through the respectable parlors like lamp oil, and it was the quiet grease under Danforth's foreclosure, for a town that had decided a woman was fallen would not lift a finger to keep a roof over her head. The silent soul who would see her plain through all of it was a widowed cabinetmaker named Silas Rourke, the closest-mouthed man ever to set up a shop on that street. He built plain, honest furniture and framed pictures, and for 2 years had made the walnut and gilt frames for the gallery's portraits, slow, careful work that suited a man who could stand a whole day alone at a bench and not mind it. He had come west, meaning to buy a piece of good bottomland along the river, and had saved toward it for years. He had lost his wife to a fever their first hard season out, and had not married again, nor wished to, and had got so far out of the habit of company that people took his silence for sourness. But Silas Rourke had eyes, and what they had been telling him across 2 years of framing her portraits was that the young woman the town had decided to scorn was the finest hand with a plate and a lens the territory had, who had carried the gallery alone through her mourning and the whispering without once letting the town see her flinch. And he understood, the way a quiet man understands, 2 things the whole street would not say aloud: that Danforth did not want the note paid at all, but wanted the lot, and would take it the moment the redemption day passed, and that the scandal Julian Prescott had set going was a plain-built lie the town had swallowed, because it was easier than being fair to a lone woman. If you've made it this far into Rosalind's story, hit subscribe, because what happens next is the part I've been waiting to tell you. He came to her at the end of a long day, when the light had gone, and she was closing the shutters with the foreclosure notice tacked to the door between them. He took off his hat and turned it in his big, careful hands, and said the longest thing he had said to anyone in years. He knew it was not his place, but he had heard what Danforth meant to do, and what Prescott had said, and it was not right, a thing she had not done costing her the gallery, and the name she had kept clean. And there was one way to slow them, if she could stand it. The note's term ran longer for a married householder than for a lone body the bank could sweep aside, and a wife with a husband's name beside hers was far harder to hurry out the door. And the moment she was a respectable married woman, Prescott's whole ugly whisper had nothing left to stand on. If she would let him marry her, plain and quiet, and let his name go beside hers on the redemption, he could buy her the time the bank meant to deny her, and the talk would lose its teeth. He would sleep in the back room of his own shop and ask nothing she did not freely give. She would keep her gallery, her plates, and her own self entire. He made the whole speech to the brim of his hat, for he could not have made it any other way. Rosalind did not answer that night. She lay awake over the dark room and turned it over, for a marriage on paper to a near stranger was a hard, strange bargain. But she understood what he had truly offered, which was not himself, but her own good name and livelihood handed back to her, the very things the banker and the liar had set out to take, and he had offered it, without once making her feel small, as a plain matter of what was right and not of charity. In the morning she lit the ruby lantern and coated a plate for a waiting sitter, and found the gallery still hers. And when Silas came by, she told him, steady, that she would take his name and be grateful, and the corner of his mouth moved, which on him was very nearly a smile. They were married 4 days later by the town circuit preacher in the little parlor of Meg and Owen Halloran, who kept the feed store 2 doors down and stood as witnesses. There was no ring and no kiss, because that was not what this was. Silas said the words low, looking at his own hands, and Rosalind said hers, looking at the window where the last of the light came in. That evening Rosalind slept over her dark room, a married woman, and Silas slept in the back room of his shop, a married man, the ruby lantern trimmed and dark on its hook, and neither of them yet knew what they had begun. The hard turn of that spring into summer was the slow making of them. There was nowhere much to be but at the work, his bench and her plates. And though Silas kept faithfully to his back room, a paper marriage has a way of leaking into the daylight, whether 2 people will it or not. He built her new plate holders when the old ones warped, made her a drying rack, mended the sagging back step, and rehung the darkroom door so it sealed at last, all without being asked, and mostly without a word. And she saw all of it, saw that the silent man did for her in the only language he had, and began, without quite deciding to do for him in return. She kept a plate warm on the stove for whatever hour he finished, mended the shirt he wore to the meeting house, and learned the sound of his plane through the wall the way you learn a clock. And the talk between them, between 2 people who had married to stop the town's talk, came slow and then easier, the way a cold shop warms when the stove is lit. She found he was not silent because he had nothing to say, but because he had spent years with no one worth saying it to, and if she did not press him, the words came low, dry, and once in a while very nearly funny. He told her, a little at a time, about the wife he had lost on the trail, and the river farm he had meant to build for her, and never had. And Rosalind did not try to fix any of it, only let him set it down where another soul could see it. And she found herself telling him things she had told no one, and the gallery had stopped being a place she merely endured. They both felt the change and were half afraid of it, for a thing built to buy a little time has no business taking root. It was a glass plate that opened the way through an old Owen Halloran who let the last of it slip. One evening late she was developing a box of plates she had never had the heart to finish. Ordinary street scenes she took to keep her hand in, and she slid one into the tray under the red glow of her father's lantern, and watched the image swim up out of the silver. It was a plain view of the gallery front by dusk, the shutters and the tacked notice, and she nearly set it aside until she saw the figure the long exposure had caught, standing steady across the street in the shadow of the awning, plainly there through the whole long minute the shutter had been open. It was Silas. He was keeping watch on her gallery in the dark, and she knew it was not the only night. She had half heard him more than once in the small hours, a bench-worn step going by, and had told herself it was nothing. She said nothing to Silas of the plate, but the next morning, careful, she asked Owen Halloran whether Silas still meant to buy his river bottom land, come the fall, the land he had crossed the whole country to get, and the old feed store man, not knowing he was telling her anything, said no, that it beat him, that Silas had let the bottomland go to another buyer that very spring and put the money God knew where, and that a man did not save 11 years for a piece of ground and then walk away for no reason a body could see. Rosalind stood a long moment in the bright doorway after Owen had gone back inside, and something began to come clear that she was almost afraid to look at. That afternoon she went quietly to the county clerk's office and asked to see the record on her father's note. And there it was in the book. The called note against the gallery had been quietly bought out of the bank's hands months before by a private party through a broker 2 towns over. so that Horace Danforth no longer held the paper at all and could not foreclose, and the private party who had spent every dollar of a river-bottom farm to buy it and hold it and ask nothing was Silas Rourke. She walked back up the street with her ears ringing and understood the whole of it at last. The quiet man had not merely lent her his name. He had taken the money he had saved for 11 long years, the river farm that was the whole reason he had crossed the country, and spent every cent to buy the note out from under Danforth so the bank could never take the gallery at all, and kept watch over it in the dark besides, and had done every bit of it silently so she would never see it or feel she owed him. Rosalind, who had been taught too young to ask a thing of anybody, felt something she had shut away since the cold weeks her father died come loose in her chest. That evening, when Silas came in, stamping the dust from his boots, and she handed him his coffee, she let her hand rest against his on the warm tin cup a moment longer than she ever had, and did not draw it back, and he looked down at her hand, and then up at her face, and did not say one word, and everything was said. But the redemption day was still coming, and Rosalind found she was not content to let it pass quietly. Silas had bought her safety while letting the town go on believing Julian Prescott's lie, and that she would not have. The gallery could be saved with money, but her name could not, and her name she meant to win back herself, with the one trade that was truly hers. So she went back through her father's plates and her own, the whole glass record of 2 years, until she found the ones she half remembered, and coated fresh plates and printed them clear and true. For here was the thing Julian Prescott had forgotten. A photograph carries its own moment, and Rosalind dated and labeled every plate she ever exposed. And among 2 summers of glass, she had the plain proof that his story of a shameful history stretching back years was a built lie, for the dated plates showed exactly when the man had truly been in that town and when he had not, that his whole account of her could not have happened. And more than that, a clear dated likeness of Prescott himself, taken that very spring on the main street, laughing with a woman who was most certainly not the respectable wife he had married. On the same afternoon he had stood in the parlors calling Rosalind fallen. She had it all in silver and glass does not misremember, and glass does not lie. Redemption Day came on, and the bank being a small-town affair, half the respectable side of the street gathered on the boardwalk before the gallery to see the lone woman finally swept out, with Julian Prescott himself come over from the next town in his good coat to watch the finish. And they found they had walked into the wrong morning. Horace Danforth stood up to announce the foreclosure and got no further than the reading of the note before Rosalind, standing steady on her own front step with Silas beside her, said plainly that the bank did not hold that note, that it had been redeemed months since and was held free and clear by her own husband, and there was nothing on that corner to take. Danforth, who had not troubled to check his own paper, went a deep and speechless red, and the clerk was sent for and confirmed every word. And then, before Julian Prescott could smooth himself out of the crowd, Rosalind did the thing she had truly come to do. She turned the gallery's display easel around to face the street, and on it she had set her plainly dated photographs, the record that made a liar of every word Julian had spread, and a dated likeness of the man himself, laughing on the street with a woman not his wife, on the very afternoon he had been in the parlors ruining her. She did not say a cruel word. She only stood beside her own true pictures and let the town read the dates for themselves, and watch the color drain out of Julian Prescott's face, and understand at last which of the 2 of them had been telling the truth all along. He was gone from the boardwalk before the crowd had done murmuring, and gone from the county, they said, not long after, and the story he had built came down as fast as it had gone up. There was no shouting and no triumph in it. The people simply saw in plain silver what they had been too quick and too unfair to see before, and a good many of the respectable wives found they had somewhere else to look. Horace Danforth took his called note and his fine plans for a brick bank back across the street, having reached for a lot that had never been his to take, and Rosalind kept her father's gallery, free and clear, on the corner she loved. Silas Rourke had stood at her shoulder through the whole of it with his hat in his hands, and when it was over he did the thing he had never done, and turned to face her plainly where any who cared to could see. He did not make a speech. That was not his way. He only said low, but not so low that Meg Halloran, a step away, could not hear, and later gladly tell it, that he had told her in the spring he would sign off the redemption once she was safe and go his own road, and that he had found he was a liar, because he had no wish on this earth to go any road that did not have her on it, and that if she would have him for true and not for any name got up against a bank and a lie, he would count it the great good fortune of his life. And Rosalind looked at the silent man who had spent his one dream on her, and kept watch in her dark, and never let her see it, and did not make him ask her twice. They were married again in the early fall, for true this time, in the little church that had lowered its voice about her only a season before, with the Hallorans and half the street crowded into the pews, and a few of the respectable wives near the front, looking a shade ashamed as well they might. The circuit preacher said the words right at last, the clean fall light coming down through the glass. And that evening, after the last of the guests had gone, Rosalind took her father's ruby glass lantern down off its hook and lit it, and set it in the gallery window where the whole dark street could see the small, warm red glow of it, the light her father had raised up 1,000 true faces by, and that had shown her the truth of Silas Rourke when he would never have told her himself, because the worn red lamp that had been the one light of home through a whole cold, lonely year had earned its place at that wedding as much as anyone in the room. She had come into that hard year a photographer's heir with a shop she could not pay for, and a name a stranger had stolen, certain the best of her life lay buried in the cold ground. She grew old on that corner instead, beside the quiet man who put his name beside hers when no one else would, and the faces of that whole valley rose up out of the silver under her hands for 40 years, and the wives who had once lowered their voices about her brought their families to her door. The ruby lantern hung in the darkroom still by then, worn redder and dearer than ever, beside a newer one Silas had made her in walnut and glass with his own hands, and on the last evening of this story the two of them caught the low gold light through the gallery window together, the old worn one and the new. A name, it turns out, is the smallest part of what a person is worth, and the cruelest thing a town can do is decide who you are before it has troubled to know you. So here is what I will leave you with tonight, friend, before the lamp burns low. When the world has believed a lie about you and reached for the one thing you have kept alive with your own 2 hands, do you let their whispering and your own pride drive you off your corner, or do you trust the right soul to see the whole of you in the hard season and stand beside you in the easy one? Tell me which one you would have chosen, and pull your chair up to the hearth again soon.